welcome to the Football Pod. My name is Konstantin Eckner, and please welcome with me my co-host, Abel Mezaros.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Konstantin. And today what we want to do is have a discussion on football, media, and analytics. Now, you are probably familiar with all of those subjects, but we wanted to bring you someone who works at the intersection of these three, and someone who asks sort of the questions that data is usually asking, someone who writes about, let's say, interesting topics such as crossing and whether we should do that in football, expected goals, and somebody who has been doing this basically for about 6-7 years, from his blog to Analytics FC to Opta. So please welcome Mr. Tom Worville.
Yeah, Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no worries, guys. Great to be here and great to chat with you.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you, because you joined The Athletic when actually?
February 2020, so just before the world blew up, I guess, and things got very weird.
Yeah, so over a year, a little bit over a year, you're at The Athletic. And, you know, The Athletic, they are putting out a lot of content. Of course, that's kind of the business model also, you know, having insightful content, but also just having a lot of stuff on football and every other sports you can imagine. And you're, of course, in the football section and doing a lot of great work. And that's why also we invited you, because, of course, you're a great personality and a great writer. But I want to ask you, because, I mean, you joined them as kind of, and don't take it the wrong way, as kind of the data geek.
Yeah.
And like, how much can you still at The Athletic, which is a big corporation, big company with all these kinds of stuff they are covering, how much can you still embrace your data geek personality at The Athletic?
Yeah, I guess I was very much brought in as, obviously analytics is a growing part of the game and the pro side and the media side, and brought in to kind of offer that. So I'm probably encouraged to embrace that side of you know, my interests, my skill set, and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of, you know, room to grow in terms of like doing pieces that are very data intensive that you probably couldn't do anywhere else at a publication of similar size, and then also working with a bunch of writers who are increasingly more and more data literate and interested in using this stuff as a different angle in their pieces. So I'd say, yeah, it's a perfect fit in terms of, you know, what both I was looking for and also what kind of they want from me is to, I guess, embrace the geekiness, as you said there, Konstantin.
and how much, I mean, there's also kind of the discussion, you know, how does data in sports journalism, but in general, how does data fit the traditional journalism in print media? Of course, it's I think it's more difficult to just put a lot of data graphics or graphics onto a print page, of course. And how much can you work with certain kinds of tools, you know, where it's interactive and stuff like that? Is this also something you have dipped into?
Yeah, definitely. I guess. Yeah, print. It's hard. I mean, we don't do print, and or I guess for me, I leaned a lot on seeing the stuff that John Murdoch has probably, you know, grown at the FT for years and really made his own and kind of dominated this space and been a leader of this space for a long time. And we've seen the economists jump on board in a similar fashion. So I take a lot of inspiration of how those guys have gone about using data and growing their kind of data journalism side of things. But for us, you know, interactives and I mean, data is a lot of what I feel I bring and what myself and Mark Carey, who's another kind of recent addition, bring to the team. And interactive, you know, is probably one of those things that is in the mid to long term, but I think of, you know, for us, it's an area definitely worthy of exploration. The reason why those stuff's important is a static graphic. You have to manually update, whereas interactive stuff, and you've got a fully worked back end, and you build really beautiful user experiences like on 538 and other sites. That's where I kind of see the future of this side of data journalism in the long run, definitely.
Yeah, actually, that's something I want to kind of go back to in terms of, you know, we jumped into this conversation in terms of what you do now, but like, would you say it's fair to say that, let's say 5-6 years ago, your role as a data journalist, certainly in football, wouldn't have existed? Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I think that data journalism in general was quite, you know, in its infancy, and the roles were far less defined as they were now. It was probably a bit of a Wild West, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the people that I was going to bring up in terms of, you know, John Murdoch and some of these other people like Nate Silver in that space. And how do you see, like, what do you see data journalism, just as a more meta question? Because, you know, I think like the way a lot of people conceptualize this is some, and I think you've talked about this as sort of a translator. And I think like Mike Goodman is another person who does this, who I think all of us know fairly well. And the need for this person who either like you builds models or is very comfortable in terms of, you know, coming up with the coding and all that stuff, but also has the linguistic skills or the people skills, or what are those skills that I think you need to be a successful data journalist?
Yeah, especially in a domain such as like football analytics, where the stuff is complex. It's not always the easiest thing to understand, but there is an end audience who are interested and want to embrace this stuff. And I guess it's just helping them along that journey and helping them understand the various things, even if it's something as I mean, now it's basic. Expected goals 5 years ago wasn't basic, right? And we still have people who are skeptics and you know, disconnect from what the name is and what the actual metric measures and things like that. So yeah, I guess my role, if I probably wasn't at The Athletic, I'd be doing the same sort of thing at a club, right? And that's just, I'm probably just one of the few people who didn't go down the club route and went down the media route instead.
Well, what's something that stands out for you, or like, what were some of the challenges, or what do you see some of as the difficulties? Because I think, you know, as you mentioned, like, yeah, maybe the XG war has been won, or however we want to phrase that, or maybe it's been lost if you're looking at it from another perspective. But like, what are some of the day-to-day things, and not just necessarily like inside the, let's say, a newsroom or a company like that, but just in terms of with the readers or people who consume the content that you're putting out?
Yeah, I guess it's just listening to the readers and seeing if there's certain things that we're getting wrong or not explaining properly, or graphics we pull together which aren't quite clear. So there's that kind of like, you know, read the comments, and we're lucky that we have a comment section at The Athletic, which is probably one of the friendlier on the internet, which is useful. And then another challenge, I guess, it's probably the same for a lot of people. It's allocation of time and managing what's a good long-term project to focus on, like the recent crossing piece I did, and then what's the other kind of quicker wins you can get in terms of, you know, our Norwich writers doing something on Max Aarons. How can we supplement some data there to tell the story in a more objective fashion, alongside the Wisecout grabs, or alongside kind of, you know, interviewing people and getting to know Max's background. So yeah, it's just a lot of plate spinning at times, but yeah, it's good plate spinning. Hopefully for the reader, it's interesting stuff to get into as well.
Now, you mentioned that a lot of people from the same sphere you're coming from joined clubs or work for federations and are basically in football and not in football media, in some way or form. So what would you tell aspiring data journalists who are especially interested in sports in general, maybe football and, you know, especially, but sports in general, who are interested in going that route, who might be now at university? What would you give them for advice to become a data journalist? That doesn't have to be at The Athletic, but, you know, at a reputable media outlet.
Yeah, I guess I'm always quite bad at offering or giving advice, because I feel that you should never really take it from people who don't have skin in the game, I guess, and aren't really going to take that journey with you. But I feel that my path kind of goes against what you probably should do. Like, I specialized super early, and I really doubled down on football and getting involved in football, and that could have easily not paid off, right? And then you've got all this time that you spent investing in this passion, and it wouldn't have been really useful anywhere else. So I do think kind of a generalization in terms of having the skills in data journalism to work with a multitude of data sets and using different coding languages and building different kind of graphics or whatever it may be, just being an all-rounder to start with and specialize later. Whereas for me, I got lucky and kind of the way I specialized so much, and I hit this wave of football analytics, and I was quite fortuitous in that extent. But yeah, I think that would be my main advice, really.
And so just in terms of the things that you have been doing recently for The Athletic, we'll get to the crossing one, but I think like one of the pieces that maybe you're most famous for is the 10 commandments, which of you know, football stats, because like I think it was also like Mike Goodman who always has this line where everybody really likes stats as long as it supports what you think. but then or the team that you support, but as soon as like it contradicts or it sort of goes against the thinking that you have, then sort of the pitchforks come. So have you had those kind of experiences where somebody really came after you, and how do you deal with them? Maybe just talk about that first.
Yeah, I definitely have those experiences. That was probably more to just talking crap on Twitter than actually anything professional related. But I definitely do feel there are situations where, say, we have a writer who's doing a piece and they found a stat which really backs their argument, and it's one of those where like there's no real context, and it's very much like a kind of lies and statistics based thing where it's not really backed in truth. Maybe it doesn't mean exactly what they think it means. So there's a certain amount of balancing in the day-to-day to try and turn them away from that and using more reliable stats, really.
And then, like, how does one go about that, right? Because I think there's something that I struggle with sometimes in terms of, so like I'm on television and obviously working in Hungary, the space in terms of data literacy is probably a little different to say what Germany is, and Konstantin can tell you more about that, but or the UK as well. And like so we we'll still get the possession stats, and we'll still get the shots and I'm always saying, well, why don't we just use, chance quality or XG or some of these other things, or even like the clean sheets one is the other one that I think we always get into. And like, how does one like, and maybe I'm asking this question for myself as for you, but how does one sort of, keep at it, keeping at it and fighting the good fight, or what do you have to do?
Yeah, I guess with our, it's a slightly different medium, right? Like I have more words to play with, and you've got a finite amount of time, right? But I always feel with those situations, it's probably more like if you can find an example of where the stat which the person's using kind of doesn't work or it breaks down, and then you introduce the next stat as the reason why it's a good solution, that's a good way to kind of sell it. And the way I always use that with XG would be like, I found a game in the Opta database where there was like 12 shots for each side, but one dominated. And if you watch the quality of them, one was far higher than the other. And then, you could say, oh, look, you can't use the shot count because they aren't of equal quality. And then you go to the shot maps and you see one team's had like 2.4 XG and the other's had 0.6 or something like that. So I feel there's probably similar situations you can find with clean sheets, and why save percentage or goals prevented or whatever it is a better example in a situation like that.
So when it comes to using data, especially, the data being used by journalists to just take something more general, like assists and possession, maybe I'm sometimes worried about how they maybe might abuse in a way, even data, or might, show, by the way, I'm using data, but I'm pointing something out I wanted to point out anyway. And I just saw a discussion, maybe yesterday or so on Twitter. It was about Thiago and Liverpool, and it was pointed out that I think he hasn't created any assists so far for Liverpool during the season. And then someone pointed out, yeah, but you shouldn't look at assist numbers with Thiago, because I guess he has a lot of pre-assists maybe, but also he's much more of a deep lying midfielder at times. So just in general, but also you have to look at ball recovery and progression distance, progression passing and so on, like, other data points at least. But then the counter argument was, and I wanted to just get your take on it and what you like how you look at these kind of discussions. The counterpoint was, so Thiago was a success so far, or has been a success at Liverpool so far, was the counter argument basically. And then you have to say, no, of course not. I mean, I think he hasn't been as bad as some people make him out to be, but still, you can't really call him a success. Otherwise, I mean, that's just not working in any way. But what do you make of such discussions? Because sometimes they drive me crazy, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. I've had or seen a fair few of the similar types to that, and it always just feels like, yeah, you can never boil performance down to a single number, right? Even goals at times isn't a really great measure of a player's contribution. I think you look at Heung-min Son this season, obviously he's scored a ton of goals, but his all-round game isn't very good. So you could look at goals and say, fantastic.
Pressure from Vertonghen. Can't bring it down, and It's general terror in the Burnley back line when Son breaks forward. Oh wow, what a run! Heung-min Son from inside his own half has scored one of the best goals of his Spurs career.
You look at everything but goals and you say this guy maybe isn't as good as we think. I always view it through the kind of scouting lens of like, what is this player's role? Like, what is he asked to do? And is he fulfilling those things of essentially what's on his job description, and does he do those things well, right? And then how do we measure those? And I think that is something that people are starting to get a better understanding of the nuance behind. You know, assists isn't a great number for midfielders. Tackles isn't a great number for defenders. You know, at times for attackers, if they're not offering something off the ball or against the ball, I guess, then that's, you know, are they doing enough of their job? So I think it's probably just more opening the argument up and saying, like, look, this is what's actually asked of him. Is he doing those things instead? So it's probably just an understanding of a wider group of numbers, which can actually get you closer to what the player's trying to bring to the team.
Yeah, and then there are also some journalists, but also, you know, on social media, just fans or so that are somewhat hostile towards just data, because they think, yeah, it's like they are going by the old Churchill saying, basically, you know, don't trust any data unless you, I know, have faked it or something. I just know this saying in German, but I guess something like that. So they just oppose everything that relates to data. You know, that's like the eye test is all that matters, and then they, of course, as it is quite usual in many fields, you know, be it in politics, be it in sports, be it everywhere, they've tried to find something that proves their point, basically. And you see that the same with data. You got some anomalies, be it Lucien Favre as a coach in the Bundesliga in the XG model, which he, you know, outperforms every season, basically, or be it Naby Keita for Liverpool, where you looked at his numbers and he was a world beater, and then it didn't work for Liverpool and stuff like that. So where basically data got someone or something wrong, I in quotation mark, of course, on air quotes. So what's your kind of take on that when you see something like that someone points out, hey, by the way, the XG model doesn't work because look at Lucien Favre and look at these two other coaches in Europe or something. I mean, I know that's like sometimes a bad faith argument, but still, also, you have to counter with something there, because it just leave it there. It's also might not work actually in a public discussion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's always outliers in these situations, right? Like the models are usually tending towards an average, and they're tending towards what the average of a bunch of teams of shots have done, and there will be those who are consistently below average and those who are consistently above. And I think Favre is one of the, like you say, very few who has done. But I just think in general, I mean, there's two schools of thought, and it really depends on who you're talking to. There are certain people who are so dogmatic towards data being wrong or data being useless that they're so anchored to that belief that they ignore the fact that Liverpool have used data for years at this point to sign players. And, you know, some people you just can't debate with them the fact that they got Gini Wijnaldum right, they got Robertson right, they got Salah right, they got Mane right. Like, data was part of the process for every single one of those players. And they can easily just anchor on Thiago and saying he's not come good yet as the reason for data being rubbish. So I don't know. It's I feel we've all kind of like learnt to over time like how we best deal and work with social media. And I guess my heuristic is very much like you have a finite amount of energy, focus, and attention in a day, and there are certain things that if you can't change someone's mind, is it a good investment of time, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's had those kind of debates on air, or could have had potentially those debates, I always just tend to lean towards the shying away and the politeness, which is always a good way to
I guess there can be fireworks in that time, and it's good for viewing figures, but maybe not the viewing figures for what the reader or the viewer that you want to entertain. What they're coming for.
and I'm usually like what you said, is that some people you just can't convince no matter what, and then like I usually don't try to. And I think that's an interesting like discussion as well, because like what I wanted to come back to when you were talking about the media and coaching, and because I have this idea, and I think I talked with people about this, that a lot of the stuff that, and it's just the origins of data analytics. I mean, let's say like the way Opta started out, it was not necessarily designed for the game. It was more necessarily designed for media collection purposes. And I think there could be, I don't know, see if you agree with this, but there could be the seeds of the disconnect between these kind of levels of talking about data and the discourse that we have, is that sometimes we're looking at it more from a media perspective, as opposed to we're looking at it from the footballing perspective, and we're fitting the data to have the audience understand it. And of course that's necessary, but in some cases, like with definitions or with what's important, like I think just if we just maybe turn that around and then say, let's ask 1,000 football coaches who have been practitioners in this space for years and whatnot, and get them to give us 10 metrics that you think are important. And instead of like, some guy with 1 million Twitter followers, or a journalist who's been there for a major outlet or whatever, and shouting about possession is bad, because I just feel like we're just not moving past in that sense. Like, what do you think about this?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. Like, if we think about it, Opta are obviously huge pioneers in terms of like the growth of event data and the spread of it to media clients and pro clients. But there was a point where, Opta people were sat in the offices in like the late 90s and deciding what the metrics are. And those metrics have then come to completely dominate all football statistical discourse for all these years. And we're all kind of like living the effects of those decisions that were made. So yeah, someone's decided what a through ball is, what a cross is. Well, pass completion is something that everyone has heard of and knows, but they actually don't always realize that it's maybe not a perfect measure. So I definitely think it's interesting, and we're starting to slowly move away from the fact that like those definitions are never perfect, or certain stats don't measure what you think they do. But I just always come back to the fact that there's no silver bullet number in football to measure anything. Like, there's always context to be involved, and I think you can use more numbers to round your argument. But things like pass completion rate, you're not adjusting for difficulty of passes or things like that, which again is another number to add that in there. So yeah, it's interesting to see, and now we're seeing people like StatsBomb who are going to start doing more media stuff, and they're obviously totally geared towards the pro market and measuring the game arguably in a more coach specific direction. So whether that changes in the coming years will definitely be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, and then to kind of piggyback on that and getting into kind of maybe the future things, and because we talked a lot about the event data things, which I think has more or less dominated certainly the early versions of analytics, but now, if you look at the space, and obviously you work in the space, and Konstantin and I mostly just use these data sets, and it seems like it's been going towards the tracking data part of it, and maybe I know we had like this similar sort of discussion with David Sumter, who was on our guest earlier, but where do you see that in the media coverage? Because I like, just to give up an example, like I know it was in your 10 Commandments piece, like people use distance covered and sprints, like in Germany, for example, the duels.
Wie reagiert die Eintracht jetzt? 67. Minute und aufgepasst. Was um Himmels Willen macht Alexander Nübel? Das ist eine der rotesten Karten der jüngeren Bundesliga-Geschichte. Ein Einsteigen wie aus einem Kung-Fu-Film.
But like, how does tracking data work in the media space, or how do you think there could be better ways to utilize that?
Yeah, the interesting thing with tracking, I guess, like with event data, it's kind of uniform across all the leagues, right? Like you've got one or two suppliers, and the suppliers give the same tools to everyone, and there's kind of this, I guess, similar use cases or similar types of use of this data. Whereas with tracking data, like there's a league deal for each league. It's independent of the tracking data. There's a bunch of different suppliers. There's a bunch of different ways they productize it and pull it together. And for that reason, it's just much more of a minefield that you're at the mercy of the companies that partner with the tracking suppliers to offer it in a neat and nice way for the media to use it and things like that. So I think that's a barrier to entry for the start, because you might not have uniformity of metrics across leagues and things like that. I guess if you've got a broadcaster where you cover loads of different leagues, unless you have kind of a third party offering that tracking data, you'll have, I don't know, Stats doing Liga and Second Spectrum doing Premier League, and I'm not sure who's got maybe Karen Hager have got the German deal. So yeah, loads of issues kind of on the supply side there. But I think we'll maybe see it more and more where people will go down the StatsBomb route, and they'll kind of, get tracking data through computer vision and through kind of capturing frames and getting kind of implied tracking data through there. And anyone you speak to in clubs, that's just a far easier way for them to work with this stuff than having to kind of merge masses of frames and things on their end with the raw tracking data from leagues and things like that. So there's been this kind of shift, I guess, in terms of like the holy grail of analytics to start with, or when I was getting into it, was like, let's merge tracking event data and you have the best data sets ever, right? And then everyone realized that's the most complex and annoying and difficult task on the planet. Let's just change the way we collect the data in the first place and go from that angle instead.
Mm-hmm. And like one of your recent pieces to talk about some of your work on hand has been about crossing, and I think one of the good ways to think about analytics is asking more questions than giving answers. I think that's a good way to frame it. And so you wrote this piece, and I think crossing in general has been like a kind of a bête noire of analytics that people like to criticize, and the players to cross a lot, and then and you have some of those numbers from it that you average cross from open play gets you like 1.3% of the time a goal, and so 1 in 76, and then you talked about the percentages of if you go to a 6-second window after the cross goes to 1 in 50, and like, what was the origin of that piece, or why did you what made you think about crosses in the way, and then how did you come about thinking about that?
Yeah, so I guess it's twofold. The first was I did a piece last season about different types of passes, and crosses were kind of always something that I thought, this type of analysis really lends itself to nicely and is arguably better focused on, because passes, there's just so many different types, right? Like, I made a model and I had 50 types, but you could probably have far more than that. And passing is kind of messy because they're the most common event on a football pitch, really. So it was a kind of natural extension from that, and I was heavily inspired by the late Gary Gillard, who was a kind of pioneer in analytics, and he did a piece at the Opta Pro Forum a few years ago, and kind of saw his approach, and I wasn't too hot on it, but I liked some of the things that he did, and I just trying to change it slightly. And you kind of borrowed the idea of an extended window and things like that, and kind of do the same sort of approach. Now, Gary's piece, I think, looked at cross end locations as well, which I think can get a bit iffy because of the way that end locations are coded. If I'm aiming for Constantine in the box and I actually hit the corner flag on the other side, that's where the end location will go, right? And it's not maybe where I was aiming for my cross, or hopefully not. Otherwise, I need my head checking. So it's that was the approach, really, and it's been I had a ton of good feedback, which is always nice. But I actually had an Instagram post sent to me this morning of some school in Melbourne, in Australia, who were reviewing the crosses from their recent game in line with kind of the charts that I made for the piece, which was quite fun to see, kind of analysis and being used in the wild.
Have you gotten those kinds of feedbacks from players or coaches, or is that, to the extent that you can talk about it? I know you work with like practitioners in the space who will be at club as you were once thinking about it, but do you get that, or how often do you get that, and what's generally the feedback?
Yeah, I guess less on the player and coach side, just because access for that is a killer. But definitely a lot of kind of scouts, analysts, analytics guys at clubs. It's a pretty small circle of people, and we talk a lot and share ideas and things. So there's there was a lot from that, which is interesting. And kind of there were some clubs who were kind of saying, one analyst was saying that they use a similar analysis and it informs their training, and they actually go on the pitch and draw the crossing zones with like the spray, and then look at building training patterns that they can then look to cross from those locations, which they think are kind of the good locations for them. So that was really cool to see, like how in clubland, how data actually informs training, which informs the game model, which informs how you watch the team play on a Saturday.
That's interesting, and I actually wanted to ask you, and more in a way that I was wondering if whether actually because we have talked about crossing and the inefficiency of crossing for so long. There was, of course, this famous Manchester United match against, I think, Fulham or something, where they had like, I don't know, 1 billion crosses and nothing happened, and like accuracy of 1 point something percent or 5 point something percent, who knows? But it was really, there wasn't any output, any shooting output coming out of it, and they just crossed and crossed and crossed and crossed, and just in a way, it's also kind of boring at some point. I think in the 90s or so, people thought like crossing and like high speed, wing plays or something that's exciting. But if you do it over and over again, it becomes also boring. But actually, just one remark I want to do before I ask you something. I also kind of happy that now we have all these things we can do to track down crossings or to track down other things and to analyze them over a course of time. Because I remember when I couple of years ago started out as a tactics blogger, I sometimes watched. I think at one point I watched all the Atletico Madrid matches and just paused at every shot and every cross, and then just threw out on a map, and then that was basically my data analytics over the course of one season of Atletico Madrid. So that took a week. Anyway, but back to the topic. I still wanted to ask you, because like we have talked about it, and I mean there have some people, as you pointed out, have analyzed crossing and efficiency, but still. And maybe that's like just, my eye test now, and maybe I'm wrong, but I still think like, has there anything changed in the crossing game? Or is it still kind of the same that was 5 years ago and even 10 years ago? I mean, there are some outliers, but that comes from like accurate crosses or like outstanding crosses or something, or just, have kind of a technique that's also maybe different, charisma or something, charisma or other people. But in general, you think like, no, nothing has changed. So there's like, yeah. Are clubs changing? Have you seen any from your analytics, any changes in crossing, or is it still the same in a way? And like we have to wait another 10 years before there are actually adjustments?
Yeah, so I mean, we saw it at the base numbers in the article where the number of crosses have come down, but in terms of the way that clubs kind of approach this, I think this is one of the interesting areas where they're using the tracking and the event data, because clubs will now look at kind of number of bodies in the box, or is there a way that they can train or measure movement in the window kind of preceding and following across, and kind of tweaking how players react in certain situations. And I think that is where, they'll get more efficient from crossing at times, or there's like a thinking behind the strategy of crossing. I mean, you see it with Liverpool use crossing so much, and there was a time when Man City, when they'd go behind or struggling against a deep defense, they'd also use crossing to kind of, I think they were trying to profit off like rebounds and stuff, and things like that. But then on the flip side, you have kind of the Arteta approach, which felt like the Fulham game when I watched it early in the season. I can't remember who Arsenal were playing. Maybe it was Wolves. And there was just kind of, I think Arteta referred to it as pure maths, that, the more crosses you put in, the more goals you'll score. It doesn't quite work like that.
I think it's the first time in the Premier League that we put 33 crosses. I'm telling you, if we do that more consistently, we're going to score more goals. If we put the bodies that we had in certain moments in the game in that box, it's maths, pure maths.
And even that, I mean, there's a great, one of the kind of definitive even basketball analytics pieces by a guy called Seth Partnow. He wrote this for Vice a few years ago, I think, and it was kind of an argument of why like not shooting twos and always shooting threes is actually a bad idea. And it's because teams would always kind of look to, they maybe get a good look from within the 3-point line, but they give it away to go for a 3-point shot that was ultimately a lot harder at the cost of this, essentially this 2-pointer. And I think that is that situation with crosses as well, where teams will cross from certain areas thinking, we'll score 1 in 33. So if we put 33 crosses in, we'll score a goal. It's like, well, that's on average. It's not on kind of, if you hit that number, a goal appears out of nowhere, right? So no, there's a lot more kind of in-depth study that teams do, and I don't think we hear too much about it, but they definitely are zooming in under the microscope of these different areas and how they can influence training in the way that teams play as well.
So, and where, the crossing is something, as I mentioned, that has been discussed for a couple of years, and also, of course, great that you have added something to it. And I think like that's also something I enjoy. It's not only Athletic, but there are others, as you mentioned, other outlets and other analysts / journalists who are adding to it. And there's always something new to explore in a way. Even if, if you sometimes think, oh, I've already read stuff about crossing, but then I read your article, there's actually new stuff, or even just things I was remembered of or reminded of what I maybe read or heard somewhere. But it's always nice that these discussions are advancing in a way. And it's the same with throw-ins, it's the same with passing, it's the same with shooting and efficiencies and all this. There are 1,000 things you can talk about. The same with tracking data, I guess, in a way, mechanical data. So it's always hard, and I sometimes get asked about like what's the next tactical revolution, that I never have an answer. But do you see anything in the media data analytics sphere, but also in the just football sphere when it comes to data analytics that has been underexplored, and maybe there is something that will be where we see more pieces, more conference papers and so on in the next couple of years, next few years maybe? Is there something where you see on the horizon that's still underexplored?
Yeah, I always think conference papers are probably a couple of years ahead, and we're playing catch up in the media. But I think the whole suite of kind of possession value, expected threats, these kind of, I guess, value metrics, which look to give a value to every single action on the pitch of how likely they are to increase or decrease the chance of scoring. I really don't think that there's been enough media uptake in those and kind of giving credit to players who are just good at progressing the ball upfield. It's the kind of metric that would show fans that Granit Xhaka is actually a very good ball progressor, and Thiago again is another example of where he's actually useful. So there's a ton of ways that you can dice that. You can look at it in terms of in the box score. Can we look to measure opportunities to score and not just shots and goals? But were there times where we got on a high value situation but didn't create a shot from it, something like that? And also, ball progression as well, which I mentioned is a huge thing. So we've used it a little bit on the site. I mean, we have access to Smarter Scout, and we have a good relationship with them, and they have a ball progression metric, which is similar to those. If you move the ball into a higher value area, you get more reward. You've helped your team hopefully score more in the future, and that's something we're going to kind of look into a bit more, because you can split that down into passing, carrying, if you're tackling high up, all that stuff. So for me, that's an interesting one to get into, and people always ask me, what's beyond XG, and I think that could be the one for now, at least, until we have a model that's completely solved football. I think that's probably the next closest thing we've got.
Now, before we let you go, I mean, there was recent articles about Kevin De Bruyne signing with or re-signing, extending his contract with Manchester City, and actually not really relying on just an agent, although you need still lawyers and everything, but still, to kind of know about his value, you actually use data analysts. So, I mean, right now you're at The Athletic, and The Athletic is, of course, a great media organization. So is there a second career for you in agenting, being an agent for the Kevin De Bruynes of the world and just helping them to squeeze out a couple of millions out of the clubs?
Yeah, it could be very lucrative. I remember chatting to a few scouts about it a few years ago, and they were like, we could use this in player contract negotiations because of signing on fees. And I thought nothing of it. It wouldn't go anywhere. And then you see the De Bruyne thing, and you see the figures, and you're like, okay, maybe I made the bad decision at that point. But this will become a larger part of the way that players go about finding new clubs and getting the more new contracts and better contracts and things like that. So there's definitely a market for it, because as we as consumers are learning more about the numbers in the game, the players are doing it too. I mean, I was in Manchester last week interviewing essentially an England international about his data. And he was so switched on and knew everything about it. We were talking about expected goals. He was saying that he wasn't, he needs to get into better scoring positions because he's seen his data and knows that he scored a lot in the past, but he won't be able to replicate it in the future and things like that. So it's, the game will move more and more towards that point. And I think the De Bruyne deal is probably a good milestone of that, really. Yeah, and as the game is progressing, you're of course on the cutting edge of what's going on in data analytics. So, Tom, it was really great to have you on our show. It was an enjoyable discussion. Thank you for your time. Yeah, no worries. Great to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Tom is at Worville on Twitter, and I'm kind of jealous because I actually wanted to have the @my surname on Twitter, and someone is using it, but not really using it. And it's just there, but it's kind of that, so kind of jealous there. So I don't know what the policy is. Is it 10 years of no use, and Twitter will open it up again? So I have to check that actually.
I'll I'll get there in first, Constantine, and then you can buy it off me. That's how we can do it.
Oh yeah. Okay. I see. Now that you can't make money with agent in Kevin De Bruyne, you have to find our race. Other avenues
Exactly. Far less lucrative, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I give you $10. All right. So to wrap this up, Tom is at Worville, and on Twitter, Abel is at BundesPL. I'm CC_Eckner on Twitter. And if you want to support us, please visit patreon.com/thefootballpod. And for now, we have 3 words left for you. We are out.